when you are aware of them, you can say, hey, I don't want to participate inside this reindeer game because this reindeer game results in eating babies' flesh.
Right. But here's the next thing is, what do you want to participate in?
Approach all things
with reason. Reasonable
Dissent.
Reasonable Dissent with the Blackwolf and Kopus Malini.
Hi.
So, you were talking to me about small minds and
minds and microscopic thinking.
Yeah, one of the first thoughts that you said were like flat earthers.
Yeah, well, I was using flat earthers as an example, but
how many flat earthers have you met in your life?
Thank God, never met any in public, and never met any in person. I was only using flat earthers as an example, but I've noticed that most folks that we come across these days, they think that the world is a lot smaller than it actually is, and I think that leads to a lot of the "I'm right, you're wrong" attitudes. And I think that also, and the reason I brought up flat earthers was that, their biggest argument is that you go out to the beach and you look out and you don't see a curve. That's because the Earth is a lot bigger than you think it is.
It's not really it's not really their main argument, actually.
Well, it's one of them. But the point that I'm making there is that I've noticed that most folks have a very small worldview, is that they think that the world is smaller or that they're bigger, and it affects how they view the world and how they interact with people.
I agree with the fact that most people have a smaller perception of reality than what reality is actually capable of doing. Mm-hmm. I disagree on the flat earthers. I think a lot of flat earthers are super open-minded, and that's why they become flat earthers. I don't think
that's why you can't talk to them, because they're so open-minded they're closed.
No, I've talked to some flat earthers. I personally am not a flat earther, but I'm also not. I don't believe that we landed on the moon. I don't know what NASA is, but I believe it's not what they say they are.
Oh, I'm open to that possibility. I'm actually, yeah.
And in terms of like the shape of the Earth, I think it's very fishy that all we have are artistic representations of the Earth rather than actual photographs. Because what they say is, the argument on the NASA end or the scientist end is that the Earth is so huge that you can't actually capture a photograph of it. You could only make an artistic rendering of that planet.
But see, the to me, I can tell you where I wasn't actually hoping to. I wasn't actually planning on going down this rabbit trail, but I can see why that would be a possibility, because, for one thing, there's only been a couple of spacecraft that were reportedly, and I'm not taking sides here, but there have only been a couple of spacecraft that reportedly had gone far enough to actually take a full picture of the Earth. One of them was Voyager 2, I think. They went out towards Saturn. But anything else any other pictures taken from space are taken from so close to the Earth, you can't get a whole view of the Earth, because the maximum distance that they put those satellites and telescopes and cameras.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and again, I wasn't trying to go down the rabbit hole of flat Earth, but
I understand what you're saying. I just think it would be a really, really important thing as a space program to get a photograph of the Earth. I think that would probably be in 2020 we should have.
That would make sense. Yeah, it's like you're going to send out Voyager 2, flip around, take a picture, and then go back.
I think they have one. They just don't want to show it to us, and for whatever reason.
Well,
I'm not sure.
But then again, I'm also open to the possibility and likelihood that they already have shown it to us, but we just don't accept it. But the thing is,
You mean like in like a Pixar film, or in the episode, or in an
or
episode
that we
of The
assume
Simpsons?
we assume that that's what it is that it's an episode of The Simpsons, because we're being told to assume that that's what it is.
Yeah.
I think that the flat Earth movement is a manipulation, but I'm moving. That's not where I wanted to be in this particular discussion. My main discussion was about my main point was that that we as individuals tend to have a worldview that does not allow for, and flat earthers are particularly, or the ones that I've come across, are particularly susceptible to this idea that we have a worldview that does not allow for others. You know, we want the world to be predictable, entirely predictable, and we don't allow for we don't allow, how do I put this? We don't allow for the randomness that is life. The
randomness that is life.
Yeah, we don't allow for the potential for things to happen outside of what we can predict. And that can be for the worldviews, that can be for the way people are. We were talking earlier about judgment.
Mm-hmm.
You only judge people because you have a small worldview.
Well, you got an interesting worldview that's very that would fall into the same thought category as many flat earthers. Or you would agree, instead of using this jumble speech, you would agree with a lot of flat earthers on the concept that our Earth is not as old as they say it is.
Right. Mm-hmm.
As scientists say it is.
Mm-hmm. As scientists.
So you would be a you would be a conspiratory type, or
right.
a conspiracy theorist,
right,
when it comes to the age of the Earth.
Right. Well, see, I have my belief that it's only a few thousand years old. It's not millions and millions and millions of years old. And yes, some of that does come from my Christian background, but also much of it also has to do with the fact that the number keeps changing. And it seems so convenient to just throw a few millions into those years. It doesn't make sense. The idea of evolution doesn't make sense.
This is where you and flat earthers would agree, because they think about the idea of, say, the sun, and it's supposed to be millions and millions of miles away, yet it radiates heat.
Yeah, it's called radiation.
And we note its absence when it's not there. But how big would this thing have to be to radiate that heat as far away as they're claiming it actually is? Like, wouldn't it make sense that it's a lot closer than they say that it is?
Well, here's the thing: is that each of those answers,
there's not a lot of evidence
showing
that the size of the sun is the only reason we believe the sun is very, very, very millions of light years away is because someone told us that.
Well, yeah.
But if you were to, just use your plain logic without anyone actually telling you a story prior, and you're just like, how far away is that object? You'd say it's probably relatively close, because we could feel the heat coming off of it, so it must be close enough. And when it starts to move away in the side of the sky, which we can noticeably notice with our eye, it moving away. So it's not moving that far, or we're not moving that far from it. We could feel the change in temperature.
Well, here's the thing.
So we're in this, like, if it's millions of light years away, then that would mean that just like a tiny fragment, like closer to that sun, we would melt, or a tiny fragment further apart, we would freeze
to death. Right. And that has always been the observation, is that we're what they call in the Goldilocks zone. It's like, yeah, if you're too much closer, you burn to death. Too much further away, you freeze to death. But
would make a lot more sense that it's closer than they say it is.
Not to me, because of the size difference. So if
it's so visible inside the sky.
Huh?
It's very
It's
visible.
highly visible, yeah. But here's the thing: it's like
Why couldn't it just be a body of gas that's closer to us, that's not as big as they say it is? Because compared to everything else around it, we see all kinds of stars inside the sky. It's the only thing we see that is that big. Why does it have to be so far away? How does that even make sense?
Well, here's the thing: is when you look through your telescope,
We can only see the moon, right?
Right. Well, when you look through the telescope,
Besides the sun.
okay. If it is that far away, and you can still see it, how big do you think it is?
It's got to be gigantic.
It's pretty freaking big, right?
Yeah.
But
It's got to be so much bigger than us.
well, yeah, exactly. I mean,
But we rotate around it? Is that the theory?
well, yeah. I mean, we take our trips around it because, again,
So something that big, we can still make a huge trip
considering
around
also
it.
considering also the one thing that flat earthers have to deny exists in order for their fantasies to be real.
Right.
Gravity.
Well,
They
what is
can't-
gravity? Because
Anyway,
when you
so
think
going
about,
back
well,
to-
no, I'm talking about gravity because let's go with gravity too. Because you think about the idea of gravity, that is just that there's a gravitational pull that's kind of keeping, us
As you
locked
get
onto
closer
this
to-
planet.
Right. As you get closer to the source of that gravity, the stronger it gets.
Why couldn't it just be dense energy? Because
It's not where I wanted this conversation to go.
Well, I know it's not where you wanted it to go, but it's where it's going. Why couldn't it just be dense energy? Because an apple, falls from the tree, but heavy things fall.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with gravity. You could be in a you could remove the sense of gravity and just have a denser object fall quicker than a less dense object.
You can draw. Okay, I'm not a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not getting into scientific conversations.
All right.
Okay. But the whole thing is now you're asking questions that you know I can't answer.
I don't know if that you can answer it or not. All I'm just saying is I have listened to the flat earthers and I've heard some of their concepts and I can't prove them because I don't know much about science.
I'm not
but
trying
what
to
I've
prove
learned,
them.
but what
I'm
I've
trying to
learned,
sure.
but what I've learned much about science this year is that a lot of science is bullshit.
Oh, no, well, I wouldn't say that science itself is bullshit. I would say that what we're being told about science is bullshit. And what we're being told
The
about what
scientific
science
method is not bullshit.
the method isn't bullshit.
Right.
But what we're being told of the conclusions is bullshit.
Yes.
Because we're in many areas. Because, again, there is a political element to how science is being reported to us. Because if it doesn't fit the political agenda, then we're not going to give you that information.
Right, like the arms race with vaccines. I'm 90% effective. No, I'm 91.5% effective. I'm 94.5%.
I'm only 70% effective, and I'm the best.
Well, at least you're honest.
Right.
Maybe you're an honest vaccine.
But that's the thing. Is many of these many of the results that were being reported as far as scientific results are concerned have that political element to them, and I think that what ends up happening is politics is more involved with science or politics is more involved with the news than the science is. We're not listening to scientists anymore.
Yeah.
I have a roommate who's a scientist. He's a microbiologist, and this is one of the things that he and I have actually discussed many times, is that the political environment is all lawyers. Nobody's listening to the scientists. Nobody's listening to the military. They're listening only to the lawyers, and who are just negotiators and looking for ways to get their own pockets lined. And so, when you get into discussions like flat Earth and things like this, you start I don't look at all of those little details that they're trying to say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong.
What I look at the concept
at it
of
as
what
a manipulative tactic to get us distracted by those little details. And get us asking questions that don't really have any
I think it's
what's the word I'm looking for there? Consequence.
Yeah.
To where our life can go in the future, where our country.
Well, I think it has a lot of consequence of where our life can go into the future. Going back to your original statement about how our perception of reality is small-minded, and if the government from the very beginning has told us that we live on this round globe based on all this science, well, then there's nothing really left to the imagination.
I don't care about
what
that.
if just this side of Antarctica there's like a whole nother world? What if there's unexplored parts of the planet that we haven't even been able to take a look at?
Are those...
Like when you get like General Byrd, who took a look at the walls past Antarctica, he reported there being like a tunnel to like an inner Earth, and that being right there. But we've never been able to go there and take a look at it.
But my question is going there going to solve the relational problems that I'm having with the people in this city?
No, but it could. But that's your personal problem. You're having problems with relations with people inside your city. There could be other people that have no problems with anyone, and they just want to know what goes beyond the ice barrier in Antarctica. That's what they are here to do. And I mean, it's interesting. I love to hear what they got to say. I don't necessarily love the fact that every conversation that's brought up, whether it's QAnon, whether it's flat earther, it's automatically created by the system to make us argue about nonsense. What if those are the very arguments we should be talking about? Like QAnon, they dive into pedophilia. And the flat earthers, if you look at the core of their argument, they go on to how old is the planet really, which is very interesting and something that can fundamentally change our perspective on the way this planet works. And then also, what relationship do we have to the planet astrologically, and how can you manipulate people with astrology? That's another concept that
manipulating people with astrology is easy. All you have to do is you just tell them, well, the stars are aligned for this, that, and thus, and now and when you tell people that type of thing, then they adapt their behavior to the report that you gave them.
Have you ever looked deep into astrology? Like you found your rising sign, your moon sign? You wouldn't know then because you haven't really looked into it.
But
no one's read your natal charts before.
The what?
Your natal charts. See, when they just give you the cliff notes on astrology and they tell you your sun sign, well, yeah, of course. There's very, very there's thousands and millions of Scorpios walking around, and they're all not going to be the same. But if you dive into their ascendant sign, their moon sign, where all the houses are, then you have a very, very complex description of a person. And if people who have actually read their natal charts, got all that information, and you can do it for free, by the way. It's out there. It's not hard to gather. You just need to know what time you were born and what city you were born in. And based upon where the sky layout is, it's going to give you a much deeper description of who you are than you think they would give you. I'm talking about pages upon pages that would tell you, even when you should start to seek success in your life and what difficulties you probably have early in early childhood. Strange phenomenons, but we don't look into it. And look, I don't look into astrology as much as people that are really disciplined inside that field, but I've looked enough into it to realize there's something to it. And that right there makes my mind a little bit more open, I guess, in a sense. And it makes life a little bit more magical, really, if you think about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing about life, used the word magical there. The adaptation to the unexpected becomes a focus, which is good. But one of the things that and I'll be honest with you about the astrology thing is that, I have found some correlations between, what it has to say about a Libra and myself. But the thing is, I don't believe that we should allow ourselves to be manipulated by things like that.
Manipulated is one thing.
Yeah.
But if you look at like what astrologers predicted for the year 2020, and you were listening to it in 2019, then you came into the year 2020, you'd be like, wow, a lot of this kind of makes sense on an overall sense. Not to be manipulated, more as here's a tool for you to make predictions.
Or to know what to expect or something.
Like a chart predictor, if you're trying to bet on stocks, and you look at all the different there's many different graphs that are available, tools that can show you how to make the best investment, especially if you're doing short-term trading. If you pay attention to the charts more than the person that just blindly jumps into the market, you're going to be a lot more successful than the people that just blindly jump into the market. So if you look into things like in terms of the world being coded, if astrology is one layer of code, if numerology is another layer of code, there are people that use these not necessarily as oh my God, today is a 3-day, so I can't take anything serious because it's supposed to be more of a day engaged for fun. They use it as like, hey, look, I'm gonna try to. I'm stuck at work all day, but I'm gonna try to have fun with it because that's the energy the day's bringing.
Right.
You might be able to have a better experience with life, and I feel like most ancient knowledge has both leaned on astrology and numerology, but it's something that's not shared with the public. What's shared with the public is the most shallow interpretation of astrology. What's shared with the public in terms of the argument against QAnon is the most shallow interpretation of QAnon. They're right-wing extremists. They're Nazis. Okay.
Well, but see that again,
or even
that
flat
goes
earthers.
back to the small minds and microscopic thinking. There is that if you only have a few potential boxes into which you can fit someone then you are you're not thinking things through in the most detailed manner possible, or in the most detailed manner that you can manage.
Right.
And I think that if you fall into that trap of just boxing people into, or labels, you're a Nazi, you're a communist, you're this, you're that, you're a racist, right? Or you're a wacko, right?
Yeah.
If all you can do is box people in like that, then it's an indication that you only see the world as this tiny little microcosm of which you are supposed to be a lord.
Well, it's easier to manage if you can do that.
It's easier to manage, but that's not.
It's a limitation.
It's an extreme limitation there, because what ends up happening is this: is it you're not supposed to be where you can manage. You have to be able to step outside past that and explore the unknown. If you don't explore the unknown, then what happens when the unknown injects itself into what you think you can manage?
You gotta be willing to get your mind blown.
Exactly.
You can't walk through life like knowing everything.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like there are certain things that I regard as petty or even inconsequential, and so those are not things that I'm really even going to look at.
Of course.
But when they inject themselves into the realm of order that I'm familiar with, then my thing is I'll ignore it, because the thing is it's not consequential.
It's not
if it's
consequential
something, if
inside,
it's,
your life. It doesn't mean
Right.
that it's not consequential.
if it's
In general.
consequential, if it does matter, if it is a substantial issue, okay. Look,
Yeah.
I'm having an argument with my roommate, and my roommate wants to keep bringing up math problems at school or something to that effect, or math problems at work, stuff that doesn't really apply to me. Then I'm not concerned about that, okay. What I'm concerned about is how can I make the next step in my life better, make some peace in the home, right?
Yeah.
And make peace in my community. How can I bring a little order to the chaos around me, right? If I want to explore into the unknown, into the chaos that's around me, right? I'm not too concerned about flat Earth when there's people out here shooting each other over how much money they have. Right?
People are shooting each other over how much money they have. Okay.
Right? So, like, give me your money or I shoot you. Give me your shoes or I shoot you.
But that's how you concern yourself?
My thing is that the actual things to be concerned about are a little bit more immediate than flat Earth. And so, the whole point of bringing up the small mind and microscopic thinking is that
I think that when it comes to flat Earth, it's not a matter of the idea of whether the Earth is a globe or it's flat. It's a matter of people hiding information from the general public, and that's the big picture. It doesn't. It's inconsequential if it's the flat Earth or it's a sphere to most people. But the idea of there being a long-term secret held against humanity is a really, really big idea, because that can be used against us in many other ways, and is currently being used against us in an unimaginable amount of ways. So I think really that's where it comes down to it, and that's where I'm on the side of flat earthers until they're given enough respect to actually get their point of view across. I feel like they're just another group of people fighting against the hoarding of information that government, if we want to use that word, or intelligence has done against humanity. It's like we're told very, very little, and we're told you have to believe this, and most of it's usually turned out to be bullshit anyway. So like the stuff that we're taught inside school, most of it's wrong. And I don't think there's any problem to question every aspect of it, because they've put us in a situation now, because they've lied to us so many times, that we shouldn't take nothing on face value.
And see, that's perfectly. That's always been something that I've agreed with, is that don't take things at face value. This is why I start seeing things. I start seeing manipulation where most people see it as either nothing or as all there is to look at. Right? Is when I see something like flat Earth, I see it as manipulation, because this is something that's to be seen at face value.
Well, who's doing the manipulating? That's the question: is who's doing the manipulating when it comes to flat Earth?
I think the real question is why are we so obsessed with
who's obsessed with it too? Because I'm not the one screaming for order.
Small things. Why are we so obsessed with things that
because of the big picture
don't really affect our personal lives?
Because of the big picture of people fundamentally lying to us about everything.
And who are the people who are lying to us?
Those who write history.
And those are the ones manipulating. That's
exactly.
what I'm making my point there.
Okay.
Is it we're not asking the right questions. The who and the what are just fodder. Okay? The why is the questions that we're not supposed to be asking.
I think we're all aware that they want to keep us dumb. And they want to keep us
the bottom
ignorant.
of that political spectrum.
And they want to keep us towards, exactly. They don't. They want us innovating, coming up with our own ways of doing things. They don't want us exposed to the occult, the knowledge of the occult. Something that, a lot of people don't want to talk about is that there's a lot of people that recognize that they, the elites, are like the Epsteins of the world. They study the occult. The question is, why do they study the occult? Because there's probably something there that they're using.
Right.
Principles,
and here's the
knowledge.
next question: do we really want to know
wisdom.
those principles? Do we want to use them? Because we see the cost.
Well, I think that comes to the same idea of like, well, do we really want to know if the Earth is flat or round? Like,
exactly.
Well, yeah, I think we do want to know. Like, I understand the idea of adrenochrome. Adrenochrome is a drug that is used by drinking or sucking on the pineal gland of someone especially a child, after they've been through a traumatic situation. And it's supposed to give you this amazing,
if they died of it, yes.
High, right? I don't want to do adrenochrome, but I do understand that's what they're up to. So,
right.
That's important to know.
Right.
Like, I don't want to become a killer.
Now the next question is this. Now that we know all these things, what are we going to do about it? Oh, we're going to look for the next thing to know. We're not actually accomplishing anything just by wanting to know.
Well, waking people up is important because you see like structures of Hollywood that are dying now. And Hollywood is dying not just because of the whole destroyer concept that you have, that destroyers are going to keep on destroying and wreck themselves, but it's also because of disinterest, because people are more interested in hearing like you and me have conversations than they are of watching programs that are used to mind control the public. So there is importance in knowing these things, because when you are aware of them, you can say, hey, I don't want to participate inside this reindeer game because this reindeer game results in eating babies' flesh.
Here's the next thing is, what do you want to participate in?
Well, yeah, I mean, what do you want to, as personally or overall?
Well,
I want to in discovery of the truth.
So let's talk about you. Okay,
sure.
Let's use you as the representation of what we're talking about here.
Right.
So you know what's going on TV, right? You know that there's mind control going on. You know that what's being portrayed there is meant to bleed over into society. You understand that.
Yes.
And so you don't want to be a part of that. What do you want to be a part of?
What do I want to be a part of? Well, I want to be a part of the society that creates in the name of pursuing interesting and unique and beautiful ideas, things that are fresh and new and come of creation because they're essentially beautiful. They're essentially interesting and an evolution, and maybe even a renaissance of craftsmanship and technique. And
so here's the next question.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's you as a creator.
Sure.
Okay? What if you were not creative? What would you want to be a part of?
Well, I don't know if that's even possible, to be not creative and to be human. I think that, whether you're...
I see your point there.
Whether you're creating a meal
plan,
but
I'm referring to... I do see your point there, and I do think you're correct. But what if you were not the kind of creative mind that you are? Can you think outside of the kind of creative mind that you are? What if you were the type of person who was a...
What would I like to create for other people? Is that what you're asking me?
I'm asking
what would I like to create for me? Because...
No, I'm asking... So follow along with the question here, okay? What if instead of being the high in openness, what if you were someone who was high in conscientiousness and low in openness? If you were someone who was not a creative type?
So if I was someone that,
what would you want to be a part of then if you knew what's on TV?
Well, like by not creative, that's difficult for me. But what I'm gonna assume you mean is like someone that's more mechanical in nature.
Somebody like that. Mm-hmm.
Then that's
We can use that. We can use that, or we can use someone who's more of a pencil pusher, someone who's better at keeping books.
Someone that's good at accounting.
Somebody like that who's not a creative type.
Well, beyond
person.
doing your job, I mean, essentially, I'd like to create a business where, I have returning customers and people want to come back to me because I did my work with a level of competence, integrity, and honesty. Rather if I screwed up, I shared that with them.
So you see here what I'm trying to show you. Okay.
Uh-huh.
We started off with what would you, Kopus Melini, want to be a part of?
Yeah.
If you would not want to be a part of that, what do you want to be a part of?
Right.
And then I asked you to step outside of Kopus Melini and into the mind of, say,
an accountant,
a scientist. What would you want to be a part of if you knew what was on TV and you did not want to be a part of it? And you have a hard time answering that question.
I had a very easy time answering that question. I just told you that I want to create a business where I had return customers,
right,
with a sense of
but
integrity
you're still thinking
and
in
accountability.
terms. You're still thinking in terms of Kopus Melini.
That's not in Kopus Melini because I was thinking in terms of an accountant.
Okay.
Yeah, if my job is, my name is Bob Smith, and my job is to make sure that Kopus Melini's books are nice and organized because it keeps terrible receipts. Then I'd want to make sure that I coached him in the kind of in the kind of way where I got what I needed and I handled his books with integrity. And I enjoy doing this because this is the field I chose to do, and I'd want to do it with a level of integrity and maybe learn more.
How about
as I was
outside
going.
that job? How about outside that job?
Well, outside of that job, it just depends. Like, am I someone that wants to have a family, or am I someone like me who doesn't want to have a family?
Okay.
If I was someone like me who doesn't really want to have a family, I'd probably want to build friendships that were built on honesty. Surround myself with people that challenge my ideas, so I could challenge theirs. And I would like to.
What if it was someone who did want to have a family?
If it was someone who did want to have a family, then I guess I would, essentially do what I'm doing now with my tiny family, but extend that. Try to make sure that I nurture and respect the members of my family, and I built a decent income so I could support our lifestyle and maybe the dreams and ambitions that we might have and want to expand for. I guess I just want to be a good dad. I'd want to be a good husband. And in terms of good, have a mutual respect with my children and my wife, and I'd want to be a value to them. Also, I'd also want to be for them to do things with them and have a relationship where it brought value to me too.
Okay. So here's something else to consider, and I'll withdraw the statement that I made earlier that you had a hard time answering that question, because you're right, you didn't. But what about outside the family?
I don't know if I really want to do much outside of the family other than make sure that outsiding forces don't try to force me or my family to do things we're not comfortable with doing. Obviously, if in terms of trade, I want to build relationships with people, like where they could trust what I have to sell. Like that's something that's important. But outside of that, I don't really necessarily want to influence the world outside of what I got.
What if you did?
What if I did want to what?
Did want to build outside of the family?
What if I want to build outside
But you did not want to be a part of the system that's being set up by television and mainstream.
Okay, well, I guess if my family was all taken care of and, I felt comfortable, I had achieved that level of success, and I wanted to build outside of the family, I would probably create a community that was open and inviting to others, and a community that was clear with what we were as a community, what we expected of you as someone that's entering our community, and was fair, and just basically take the principles of my family and introduce it to a community, expand it out. That's probably what I would do.
What would be the goal of that community?
Well, the goal of that community, I think, would be to spread the vibration of joy and happiness, while taking care of the responsibility of basically taking care of the responsibility of self-preservation as a community. I mean, so that's it. It would be pretty simple. Look, here's a place where everyone should aspire to have a happy life, with the context that we can't ignore the responsibilities of keeping ourselves as a self-sustaining community and not having to seek outside sources.
Right.
Which would mean, hey, maybe we have something to offer and trade with other existing communities.
Right. And that was the next question, was would there be a productive element to the community?
Yeah, but I think that would be guided by the individual. I do believe enough inside the individual that they can decide what they want to do in terms of productivity. They're much better, in fact, at deciding what they want to do
than having someone
make that decision for them.
Exactly. And see, therein lies a major difference, and this is what I was actually trying to talk about, was that, a lot of people, they want to force others to do what they think they're supposed to do, rather than allowing the individual to make the decision. And that is a small mind, right? Because the idea of, I'm going to force this community to produce what I want it to produce, right? And to be this element to the overall society, right? And I'm not going to allow little businesses to, like, if it's supposed to be, let's say that this community is supposed to produce pipe, we're not going to allow it to produce
a skateboard shop.
A skateboard shop, right? We're not going to allow it to do little things like that, because you'll find people that think like this, and that is a small mind.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that small mind limits the actual production, the actual utility of everything else around it, and it doesn't allow for the individual to step in. What happens if that community had a pipe production and a skateboard production? How much more useful would you be to the overall society at that point?
Right.
Right. And the thing is, but really what I was mainly focusing on with the small minds and microscopic thinking was that the idea that people who expect others to follow their own imposed rules, they never leave home. They never leave the home they had when they were kids. So if I come out into this world and I'm expecting the world to follow my rules, I go to work and I'm expecting people to come in and follow my rules, that's a small mind. This is something I'm always struggling with every day anyway, right? That's a small mind, expecting them to follow rules that aren't mine to impose, right?
Yes.
But I'm expecting them to follow the rules that I followed at home, right? I didn't leave home. And so I'm thinking small mind, right? I'm thinking in terms, here's one. What was that thing Carl Jung said? When you're studying the archetype, be careful not to think of yourself as the archetype.
There you go.
Right? I start to think of myself as an archetype in that position.
That's why I think academia and also Hollywood are dying institutions, because they created an archetype of what a formal education is.
Yeah.
They created an archetype of what a personality,
What
an
credibility
entertainer is supposed to be, and what a credibility is supposed to be, and you know.
Credibility is a myth.
Um,
Credibility, it becomes a club used to silence a dissenting voice.
and the thing with Hollywood is latched on to politics.
Yeah.
Is what's really crippling it. It's not.
Same thing with science.
It's and science and academia. It's all kind of tied into.
It's the overreach of the government.
Back to the concept of the Epsteins of the world. They're trying to create the world in their own image. Like he had basically he was trying to farm other little Epsteins.
Yeah.
He was a eugenic monster who believed that,
And that type
the
of thing
greatest
can cause that too. Yeah.
outcome for the world would be a bunch of people that walked around that looked like him and thought like him and felt like him.
Yeah.
And that the world was his.
Yeah.
To
that's
own.
That's a small world.
Yeah,
it's
it
a small
is.
mind and a microscopic world view, and you can't try to turn the world into your little kingdom. You have to be willing to understand that there's 7 billion of us out here.
Right.
7.5 billion of us out here. Every single one of us is an individual with our own tendencies and our own beliefs.
I'm much more interested in creating opportunities for people than I am creating creating a lineage of my ideas.
Yeah.
Because I don't trust in my ideas to be, the best ideas for everybody. I think they're great in terms of my personal work, and then I invite people to, share them. And if I write a book, hey, I hope you read it. If I make a movie, I hope you'll watch it. I hope you like my thoughts and
I
ideas.
hope it's useful to you.
Hope it works out for you. But if I'm to create anything, it's going to be opportunity, because I enjoy the perspectives of others, and I feel like it makes my life feel more enhanced when I have other rays of intelligence and creativity and whatever it is you want to call it, other ways of living around me.
Yeah, I think that kind of.
Plus, I like to criticize the way you do shit. So,
yeah.
Go ahead and.
I'm noticing. No, but it's, and I don't think it's so much a matter of criticizing as it is a matter of, hey, I think I see another way to do this. You know?
Sure.
And being.
I'm just joking.
But what's the word I'm looking for? Contributing. I think contributing would be a better way to look at it than criticizing, because, I mean, I've never really seen you as a critical type person. I don't see that. I see that you're more collaborative.
Yeah.
And that's not a common thing these days. These days it's all criticism, and it's my way's better than yours. You don't know what you're doing, things like that, and that becomes.
I find that a bizarre
old.
way to live in like a time when there's so much knowledge out there. Like we live in like I can't specialize. And
the wisdom is the ability to say that piece of knowledge doesn't apply here or won't work here.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And to know which one you're talking about. And I think that most folks today are too busy being smarter than everyone to actually think and go, you know what? That piece of knowledge may not be useful in this scenario, but it still applies.
Yeah.
Right. It can't be tossed out tossing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Right. You can't just toss it out just because it doesn't apply here, or because it doesn't work here in this situation. And I think a lot of people are doing that. Is that that one situation to them is everything, and so they just toss something out.
They want to monopolize knowledge or wisdom.
Oh yeah, and that goes into
you
the
look at the most
credibility
successful podcast inside the world, and it's Joe Rogan's.
Yeah,
and the guy is super successful because he has so many people on his show that that are so different than him.
Yeah.
And he lets them talk. He lets them be them.
Yeah.
You know,
and he learns the entire time.
Yeah.
And the guy's very smart, but he learns the entire time. That's one of the things that makes him so smart, is the fact that he's not willing to look at himself and say, I know everything I need to know. And
I think, for the most part, he realizes different things work for different people.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And that's the thing that is an example of a very large mind, is someone who's willing to sit back and go, there's 7.5 billion of us, right?
Right.
And each one is different.
Oh, yeah.
But in today's society now, this is discouraged, or it seems to be discouraged, because that's what you find, most people thinking that you're all supposed to be the same, right? You're all supposed to think the same, you're all supposed to walk the same, you're all supposed to talk the same, you're all supposed to have the same beliefs. And if you don't have the same beliefs, then we're going to go to war with you, right? And then you end up with tribalism, and you eventually end up with barbarianism, and worse, you end up with barbarism. And so now, and I think that
so it's our job to dissent from that narrative, and
exactly.
Just
it's our individual jobs to do that.
Right.
Yeah, is to go, you know what? I don't think that we're all the same. We're not all the same. Each individual has his own opinions.
Yeah, they're very valid. If you listen to somebody's, point of view, it's based on something. And there's usually some truth to even the most erroneous ideas.
Yeah.
If you're just willing to listen.
Yeah.
Take, for example, someone that becomes racist.
Yeah.
They usually become racist because they had one person or a series of people from a certain race treat them really, really poorly.
Or they were told that this happened to someone in their past.
Yes.
My dad said this happened to him.
They were extremely unpopular with everyone, and then one race decided to take them in, and they felt at home with a certain, group of people because they're the only people that actually show them any attention and love.
Yeah.
And it's an understandable perspective. It's not correct.
It's not
right.
And see, that's the difference. That's something that people aren't going to understand when you say that. When you say that's understandable, they're automatically going to assume that, well, that just means you're racist.
Well, I guess some people might.
Right, but see, that again, that's the small mind. No, you have to be able to look at something critically and see where it's useful and where it's not useful. Right?
Yeah.
And this has been a struggle in the society now, particularly with racism, is that, I'm sorry, but the fact is that most people doing X are this race. Okay? And you don't find too many of these other races doing that. That doesn't mean that it's racist to say that. Right?
Yeah.
At the same time, the next question is the same person who made that observation. What is he willing to do to fix that? Or does he see a solution to that?
And it's also, too, it's like you can say the black population has been more violent in America than any other population inside America in terms of just raw, violence and aggression and crime. And that might be true, but it also doesn't speak for the individual. There's millions of nonviolent, very intelligent.
We're
not even talking about intelligence. We're just talking about violence.
Yeah.
There's millions of besides. I mean, I'm not saying that you're right, very intelligent, but I'm just talking about violence specifically.
Right.
There's millions of nonviolent, even to the other extreme, which is also not a good thing to be, which is completely docile and pushovers that are black.
Yeah, they're also black. But then you also find the more intelligent and the more emotionally intelligent ones that are able to stand when it's necessary and able to stop when it's necessary.
Right.
You know.
So you find everything, and then you're like,
because every individual is an individual unto himself.
yes,
It's not a matter of race, because you'll find the same extremes in the whites and the blacks and the Mexicans and the Chinese and the Indians.
So the stats are kind of like interesting because, statistically you can say that. You can also say statistically that, African Americans, you want to use that term, or black, whatever, have contributed more to the culture of America than any other race in terms of...
In recent years, I can see that.
Of entertainment, and just culture in general, language, entertainment, fashion, style, you can say that. But there's also, in that same breath, millions and millions of black people or African American people that contributed absolutely nothing to culture.
Yes. But
So-
here's the next question. How much of that contribution is actually virtue signaling? Is it actually them contributing, or is it we're just adopting their methods just so we can look good to them?
Well, that just depends on the individual. I mean, I appreciate a lot of black culture, not because I want people to like me or not like me, just because I think, oh, that's a cool word, that's a cool style. That was a good movie made by a black director, whatever.
Right.
That's a cool song made by.
I never look at the color. That's the thing. Antoine Fuqua is one guy that I like to watch his movies, not because he's black, but because he's good.
Well, I agree with you that you don't.
But we're not allowed to look at that anymore.
You don't have to look at the colors to do this.
Right.
But I was just making a point on statistics. Like statistically speaking, you can make these blanket statements about race or gender or whatever. But if you're not talking about the individual, they're kind of useless statistics.
Yeah.
Because because then what comes next is a policy to either encourage or discourage a certain behavior in a community that,
You got the cop
we
who
are
keeps his
labeling
hand
it,
on his gun when he walks up to a black person, but not when he walks up to a white person.
well, that we are labeling a community that never even called themselves a community to begin with. Because I think it would be even more important to say that the community I live in Baytown, is one community, but even on a more microcosm, the apartment complex that I live in is more of a community than the city, and is more of a community than the black community, because we actually interact with each other on a daily basis, and we have to deal with each other whether we like it or not on a daily basis. We are an actual community.
An actual community, right.
So these labels that we put on people
There's not
in communities.
There's not
they don't
a
really
aggregate interaction between black people in Texas and black people in New York. You're not going to find that. But what you will find is, you'll find this person knows someone in New York. Right, but you're not going to find that all the black people are all interacting. So it's not really a black community. It's just now you start to just use a different word for race.
Right.
And that's something that I don't think we're thinking about. I think when you start start addressing a community, you need to consider that you're talking specifically to a group of people that are constantly interacting with each other.
Yes, 100%. Specifically, a group of people that are constantly interacting with each other. That is a community.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just not a community.
Yeah. Exactly.
Otherwise, you're just labeling something, and you're putting a pretty word on a label for something.
And the same thing applies to, when you start talking about the trans community. Yeah. It's not a community. They don't all know each other.
If you want to talk about the trans people that live in West Hollywood from the block of, Gower Street to Franklin, perhaps, then that's a community.
That's a community because they know each other, they're talking to each other, they're interacting with each other, they're exchanging with each other. but
or the trans
Right,
people
but
that
they
are
don't
inside
know-
the comedy scene of Los
Right.
Angeles.
But-
That's a community,
but
perhaps.
they don't know the trans people here in Houston.
No.
So it's not a community. But that's the thing, is like when you start, it's the labeling thing. It's the labeling thing, and it's another way to
It's a great way to divide people.
It's a way to divide people. It reduces the way we think. It's now you're black. So you're in the black community. You're trans. You're in the trans community. You're Hispanic. You're in the Hispanic community. Now we have you all compartmentalized.
You're of a certain
now we
age.
just widen those boxes.
Yeah.
Right?
You're of a certain age, so you're a millennial. You're of a
Exactly.
certain age, so you're
Rather
a baby
than the
boomer.
individual, what do you think? And that was the whole point of asking you those questions I was asking you earlier, because I want to know what you think as an individual, not what your group thinks, not what the flat earthers think, not what the rappers think, but what Kopus Molini thinks, right?
Right.
Because that's what really matters.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we should have more podcasts like this, because we want to know what you as an individual think.
Absolutely. And what I try to do, and within my mind, is leave it as open as possible. But I do recognize, certain truths that I found, and on those, there's things I believe. Like I believe in a God. I've seen evidence of a God, unless somebody
I think it's
unless a group of people that can come out of the sky in spaceships and say, hey, remember every encounter that you thought you had with a God?
Right.
Well, let me play it back for you. See, this was actually us doing that to you. I'm
Right.
going to believe in the concept
Exactly.
of God, unless something really, really crazy
Right.
happens, because I've had enough direct experience with that.
I think it's a small mind to force others to believe what we believe. So as a Christian, I think it's a small mind to force someone to believe in God. And I think it's a small mind of an atheist that forces people, or tries to force people not to, or to humiliate them. I think that the truth of the matter is, as a Christian, let's say you're an atheist, I have as much right to believe in a God as you have a right not to.
Yeah.
And that's where we should be, because we can't actually move forward if we're fighting each other on something that is really inconsequential to this scenario.
Right. And that's where it comes down to fighting people about things that have no consequence. And I'll agree with you on the flat earthers there. Like, hey, look, if you're not bringing it up and it's not up for debate, then it really has no consequence.
Right. Exactly.
It only becomes a story when you're against me because I have a particular belief. Because maybe I'm a little bit more open to the idea of the earth being flat. I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't call myself a flat earther. I would just say I'm a little bit more open to the idea of. But
you're more open to the questions.
How likely is that to come into our conversation, or into an action plan of us ever working on something together? Unless it's literally in like, hey, I think we should do our next project beyond the wall of Antarctica, because I believe if we keep going there,
we'll find something else.
Find something else.
And that's fine. If you want to find something else, that's okay. But don't force me to believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. It's a small minds want small worlds, and it's a small mind that can't think outside of itself. Yeah,
and it's much easy to control people when there are absolutes. So you create these absolutes, and then they become triggers to push.
Well, I believe that there are absolutes that are immutable, but at the same time, like you can't break the inch, right? But at the same time, those are objective absolutes. They're not subjective.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, what I'm talking about is these social constructs that they create, and they're not absolutes, but like the labels that they put inside people.
Yeah.
With this whole corona situation with the data, they show graphs and they become,
official.
They become the only narrative. There's no other way to talk outside of that. You can't even have a conversation about what the graph is showing.
Right, exactly.
It's just, what's the graph represent? The graph represents we're in danger.
All we want you to see is the uptick. Don't look at the down.
Don't look at where the graph was before and after we took a piece of this graph. Don't
Right,
look
exactly.
at the full spectrum of it.
Don't look at what happened after we told you to put on a mask.
Right.
You know.
Or like with the polio vaccine, I don't know if you've ever seen that graph. Like polio's on the decline. They come up with a vaccine.
And it
continues to decline.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Theoretically, you could say
It
that
worked.
the vaccine worked. But if you took...
What about the rest of it?
But why was it already on a deep decline? It wasn't on a small decline.
Yeah.
It was on a deep decline.
Yeah.
So maybe you just attached something to something that was already working.
Right.
You know.
So you can't take credit for it? No. That's the thing.
Yeah. There should be more questions about that.
You know, you were mentioning earlier about the labels. One thing that I ran into at a cigar shop that I've been going to for 14 years, a guy that I knew there who for 14 years, his whole thing was always about me being white and him being black and how terrible I am as a human being for being white. And it wasn't ever, it was always those little passive-aggressive remarks, right? And one point, somebody said something about the mask and said something about politicizing it, about how terrible the right is for politicizing it. And I made the comment, I said, the moment you take away a person's right the moment you take away a person's right to make a decision for himself, you've politicized. Okay? And then instantly this guy goes off on me about, well, you guys took away our right to choose and this and this and this and this and this. About, obviously I'm the one that's to be blamed for slavery. And
that's just a flaw in logic. You know?
That's the small mind thinking is that, you know, that's the label that he shoved on me of being white. My family had nothing to do with it. I'm a Celt. We came late in the game. You know.
I feel like and
no one was ever rich.
We're this mass exodus for people to disassociate with their skin tone, and you're seeing a lot of people in the Blexit movement. Candace Owens is a big. I don't know if she started it, but she's the first person I ever heard use the word Blexit, which is like, the blacks leaving the Republic or the Democratic Party.
This is the first time I've ever heard of it.
Because they no longer want to be associated with all the labels that have been put on them for being black. And then you see a lot of white people too now. They're like, hey, look, I'm not the kind of white you're talking about. I don't even want to be called that. And I think, that's fine.
It's inconsequential.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything.
It's something, it's like for years, people have been trying to make white people feel bad about their race, and there was never really an insult that really stuck. And it was a joke that comics would often use. Like, oh yeah, call me honky, call me cracker, call me whatever. Yeah. It doesn't really hurt me that kind of way. I don't really care. And my theory, as being someone that's, half white, is that the reason why it's never really hit and hurt is because there's just too many light complexion people being lumped into the group of being white.
Exactly.
That it never really made sense.
It doesn't make sense.
It's much more of
and it doesn't make sense.
A rough thing to call to, like, I could really go in on someone as being a battle rapper and a roast comic about them being Irish. I could come up with some pretty mean insults, but it's harder for me to do that about being white. But now it seems like they finally caught people with that with the white, because they turn white into being racist. Yeah, which is
they define racism as white.
Only a small segment of the population, I believe, thinks
but they're
this.
loud.
but they're loud,
Mm-hmm.
and not a lot of people want to shut them up because they attach fundamental truths with their erroneous narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and the fundamental truth behind it is usually they're coming from a place of repression, and maybe not even individually, but historically, and they're
And that makes sense, but at the same time, it's like, again,
so I can understand the
the
perspective.
naive
there.
wants to change the world, but the wise man wants to change himself.
Yeah.
There's still something that the individual can do. And you were saying earlier about, it doesn't make sense to lump all whites into one group for all being white when there's so many different, nationalities involved. Believe it or not, the same thing applies to black people too.
Oh, absolutely.
Africa's not the only place that black people come from. And on top of that, I mean, you can't just say African. I mean, this guy might be from Cameroon. That guy
Well,
might
have you
be
heard
from
of the
Kenya.
ADOS movement?
The what?
The ADOS?
Oh, that sounds familiar, but I don't know anything about it.
It's Africans descendants of slavery. So I mean,
Yeah, but who actually is?
That's a specific group of people. It's not everybody.
It's not everybody.
But I would say there's a lot of people here in this area in the South that might fall into that category of folks. But of course,
But being black doesn't make you a descendant of
There's black
slavery.
Cubans, there's black Jamaicans,
Yes.
there's black Mexicans. Believe it or not.
Oh, yeah.
There's Dominicans, and there's also,
So you can't lump everybody
Plenty
into
of-
one thing. That's the thing. It is just because he's black doesn't make a bit of difference. Just because he's white doesn't make a bit of difference, because you've got the individual that you're dealing with, and that individual could be anybody. By the time you boil down to it. But I think that this is another thing, is that we're trying to do away with the individual so that it's just easier to think of the group. And then once we can think of the group, then we can just justify ethnic cleansing at that point.
right, going back to the eugenics agenda. And yeah, so I mean, I think really the resistance needs to stop lumping people into communities that they don't claim as their own.
Quit the us versus them.
Right.
Because
And
that's killing us.
Yeah.
It's killing us as a nation, and it's killing us as individuals. It's killing us as communities. It's killing us as a society in general. We're dying because of the us versus them cancer.
Right. 100%. So, yeah, it was an interesting conversation.
It was fun.
We hope you enjoyed.
Oh, yes.
Please like, subscribe, and
Leave a comment in the comment section. We'll read it, and we'll give us something to talk about.
right. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.